Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of 100 Sisters on Security, where our guests speak on different areas of human security and defense as it pertains to and impacts women. We are brought to you by the Ontario chapter of the G100 Security and Defense Wing, and I'm Alison Lamb, the Ontario chair. Before we begin, I'd like to invite everyone to take a moment to consider the traditional lands they're on. I am currently on Treaty 13 lands. They are the territories traditionally stewarded by the Wendat peoples, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today's very important discussion will be about the inclusion and belonging of immigrant and migrant Muslims in Canadian society and economy, and it is particularly vital to remember as we listen to this that other than the Indigenous communities, either in Canada or in Pakistan, which we will touch upon today, we are all immigrants and migrants, and we should consider how the struggles to belong are different for everyone. We are very lucky to have with us today Dr. Anila Zainub. Dr. Zainub completed her Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from York University, Master's of Science in Sociology from University of Texas RGV, and a PhD from the Department of Leadership, Higher and Adult Education at OISE University of Toronto in 2023. She has extensive background in professionally researching and working with racialized immigrant communities in the United States and Canada. She has also been engaged with providing volunteer mentorship and settlement facilitation to Muslim immigrant communities in the Greater Toronto Area. Her areas of interest are Canadian high-skilled immigration and labor market, the effects of race and religion on Muslim integration in Canada, and Allama Muhammad Iqbal's anti-colonial philosophy. Her recent publication is the edited volume titled Decolonization and Anti-Colonial Praxis, Shared Lineages. Welcome, Dr. Zainub. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
So you recently received your PhD from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education in Leadership, Higher and Adult Education. Your doctoral work is based on the social and economic integration of highly skilled Muslim immigrants and migrants. Your work focuses on the evaluation and non-recognition of foreign credentials in the Canadian economy, and you mentioned that the Muslim population experiences particularly low economic outcomes. Will you please elaborate on that? What reasons would you suggest were the cause of these findings?
I think first I'd like to say that integration, whether it's economic or social, is a complex concept. It's a fundamental concept used in interdisciplinary migration studies. And it is also complex in the sense that we define it in terms of the research goals, and it also changes in terms of national context. But there are, basic points the scholars agree on, and so we have overlapping definitions that we find in the literature. But one thing is very clear, that the integration of Muslim immigrants in Western societies is a very significant topic in terms of social and political policymaking. So policymaking in terms of health, education, immigration, etc. These are very important areas of, integration. And the research is substantial. There's a huge body of literature on that. And so what we see is that the desired goal is to integrate Muslim immigrants. And in terms of the Canadian labor market, as you mentioned, the Muslim immigrants suffer a low economic outcome. I'd say that we begin with, what kind of barriers are they facing? So what we see is that what research shows us is that they experience occupational downgrading, non-recognition of skills, education, credentials, low or absolutely no callbacks to their applications for interviews for jobs. There's a very high demand for Canadian experience still, even though the Ontario Commission on Human Rights has explicitly deemed it discriminatory. There's also physical and mental stress that Muslim immigrants experience due to discrimination in recruitment, hiring, and retention in workplaces in the Canadian labor market. So all of this then leads to low economic outcomes for these high-skilled immigrants, in spite of the fact that they are highly skilled with extensive backgrounds in their professional careers. Well, so what we see then is that research has already established that the Canadian labor market is racialized and gendered. So, for instance, we find that immigrants' foreign credentials, along with their race and gender, affects their income outcomes. So, for instance, Arab and South Asian immigrants will have a lower income compared to their other, in fact, racial minorities, and even lower compared to the non-racialized counterparts. But my research finds that in addition to race and gender, religion also has an acute impact on economic integration. So, for instance, for Muslim immigrant women, we find that especially for Arab and South Asians, they're more likely to face unemployment and low participation rates compared to non-racialized immigrant women. They're also more likely to perform unpaid low-income work in highly precarious conditions. And they're more likely to be they're more likely to be assigned caregiving responsibilities. And in terms of social integration, they're more targeted for hate crimes compared to Muslim men. Um, so, what this tells us is that the burden of integration is then placed on Muslim immigrants, and they are expected to integrate into the host society. And this expectation then leads to, dealing with these barriers that I just mentioned. And they're kind of left alone to deal with them in many instances. And, even though this burden is placed on them, we also have, research which tells us that uh, they're not going to reach income parity with their native-born counterparts, unfortunately, because there's so many obstacles in place. Um, so alongside of that, what I find is that there's an increase in Islamophobia in the labor market. And its effects are evident then on the economic outcomes. So to to then compare it to other aspects of integration, I would say that economic outcomes then cannot be separated from social integration. Because what my research finds is that there's almost a dialectical relationship between the two. So when we are impacted in one area, we're also impacted in the other. And this is where we find that this is it needs to be addressed. Both areas of integration need to be addressed.
Thank you. So in the past, you've beautifully explained the concept of khudi and how it relates to Muslim immigrants and migrants and the liminality they face as new arrivals. Will you please explain what khudi is and how it is related, how is it related to social and economic integration? And what do you mean by khudi as the decolonized self?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Allison, for your attention to detail to my work. I really appreciate that. So Allama Muhammad Iqbal was a poet philosopher who was a mobilizing voice behind the anti-colonial movement for freedom in India. He introduced the concept of khudi through his poetry and prose. Um, Khudi translates to the self, and he believed that Muslims must let go of pessimism, and a defeatist attitude in their fight for sovereignty. He believed that khudi, or the self, has the capacity to transform adversity and oppression through empowering our conscience and our minds. So my research, since I have attempted to contribute also to by invoking indigenous concepts, so I decided to apply this indigenous concept, which is indigenous to India and Pakistan, and it is rooted in Muslim historical and cultural traditions. I attempted to then make connections across time and space to essentially form bridges by applying the concept to present day issues that Muslim immigrants face in their integration in Canada. And Sukhudi is a revolutionary concept. It translates, like I said, to the self. But Iqbal didn't just envision it for the decolonization of India, is what I believe. I think he envisioned it for all times. It is, although it is, translates to the self, it is not just the self of an individual, it's also the self of a community, of a nation, and in their struggles against oppression and colonial India at the time. But as I apply it, it is I've utilized it to interpret the resilience and agency that I saw in my Muslim participants. Even though they face countless tribulations. And so when we invoke a term like decoloniality in the context of migration and integration, we must also consider its historicity. And we must also consider the epistemologies which are associated with that. And so the integration discourse, if we delve a little deeper, we see that it decenters the Muslim self. It decenters their identity. It does that through erasure, through denigration, and it is deconstructed and reconstructed over and over again. And it happens through their experiences of dealing with colonial formations of whether it is institutional level or societal, systemic, and it all happens through in when the process of migration begins and through the process of integration. So what we see then is that this racialization and this objectification of the Muslim self is very, very, damaging. And it is only when the Muslim's self is transformed through a claim to the integration process is when we see that, a decolonized self, as you mentioned, appears. So, the self is transformed and, they take control of their situation. They try to preserve their identity. They try to preserve their human capital, even, I would say. And in the sense that, they bring so much with them. And the attempts to begin from scratch over and over again to it systematically, for many, it destroys them, it damages them, it damages their identity. But when they claim it, and that's where their agency, their resilience comes in. And I saw many examples of that in my work from my research participants, and I was very privileged to have access to their stories of these, of strength, of resilience.
It's I think that that's a very important perspective that you bring, because a lot of people, when they think of colonialism and decolonization, it's a very, well, especially in Canada, it is a very specific view of it and maybe not very in-depth, but you brought it in through a different lens in this way, and that's very much appreciated. The Council of Europe defines Islamophobia as the fear of or prejudiced viewpoint towards Islam, Muslims, and matters pertaining to them. Whether it takes the shape of daily forms of racism and discrimination or more violent forms, Islamophobia is a violation of human rights. There
Yes.
seems to be a lot of misunderstanding and misconception around the terms Islam and Muslim as they pertain to race, ethnicity, and religion. In extreme cases, this lack of understanding has led to fear-mongering, hatred, and violence. Will you please guide us to a better understanding of what Islamophobia means to you?
Yes. I believe, based on my research and my experience, from my work, Islamophobia is the absence of security, inclusion, and equity. It is the presence of fear. So my research, building on previous studies, finds that it is a lived experience, meaning that it affects Muslims in all walks of their life, in every aspect of their daily lives. So from, simple day-to-day things like taking a walk outside or going grocery shopping or workplace interactions, to life-defining experiences and decisions. For instance, buying a house, career promotions, all of those things then are impacted by Islamophobia. And it doesn't just affect them on a personal level, it affects them on the level of a community. So an entire community is affected um, in their daily lived experiences, and when we see it from that perspective, we have a better understanding of how to address it. It is not abstract anymore. It is it's a defined, well understood concept at this point, and I believe that it is affecting Muslims at a global level now. So yes, so I think there are laws in place which are hurting Muslims, and there's the implementation of good laws which are in favor of Muslims, and that implementation is not happening. I think these people are, very much a part of this nation, and they have a claim to security, to inclusion, and alongside other racialized minorities, and no one should be subjected to that sort of violence or harassment. And all of these racialized communities can understand, and I see that they're building allies with Muslims in their fight to counter and combat Islamophobia. And I'm very hopeful that things will be better. And so yeah, I hope that answers some of what you were asking.
It sounds to me a bit like you feel Islamophobia is always present. It's always a part of a life for a Muslim individual and could even be considered in many ways as systemic.
Yes, yes, I do believe that based on my research and previous studies, which I'm very humbled to share that there are many scholars in Canada who have contributed to this work, and who I've found useful for my work. And so they've been working to uncover biases in the system, whether it's in, places of learning, education, health, immigration, all kinds of things are happening, in terms of securitization, that shows that Muslim communities are seen as a threat to at a systemic level, at a societal level, and that is something that needs to be addressed more. I think there is a lot of good that is happening in terms of how the government is approaching it, and other communities are also approaching it. Our own community is working towards that, but there's more work. There's a lot more work. The Senate's report was, I think it came out last year in November, on Islamophobia, and on human rights, the report on human rights, for Islamophobia, and it clearly indicates that this is a systemic problem. It's something that needs more. They actually say that it needs more funding, and it needs more, to combat it at the federal level. So there's work being done. I'm hopeful. Yeah.
So this episode will drop on the National Day of Remembrance of the Quebec City mosque attack and action against Islamophobia. In 2017, 6 Muslims were killed and 5 injured in a shooting at the Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec City by a lone gunman with a history of anti-Muslim views. You've done research on Muslim immigrants and migrants as the target of hate crimes and anti-Muslim sentiment here in Canada, a country that is quite proud of its diversity and inclusion. What are your thoughts on this contradiction and why it exists?
Um, Indeed, it is a very tragic day in Canadian history, and it is also a day of reflection for me as a Canadian citizen, a mother, a scholar, and I believe we should have seized the opportunity to say never again. However, sadly, we have witnessed more attacks. We have witnessed a tragedy like, when Afzal family lost their lives to the Islamophobic terrorist attack. The recent sentencing of the Afzal family's killer just makes it even more difficult, to remember the Quebec mosque attack. And so it is definitely something that we don't want repeated. For not for the Muslims and not for any racialized minority group. These instances are an indication that there is a disconnect between what laws exist on the books and how they're applied and implemented. And I think that's where the work needs to be done. That, even though there is a recommendation that by that report that I mentioned earlier, that there need to be more criminal offenses, laws for more criminal offenses that need to be made. But I think that even the laws that are in place, if they're applied, and in terms of you know some harassment that takes place on a daily basis, things like that, and then so I see resilience, I see agency on the part of Muslims. And even if I go back to the incident, the Quebec attack mosque incident, um, one of the survivors, who is a Canadian hero, he took he was shot 7 times. I think his name is Mr. Derbili, if I'm not pronouncing it incorrectly. He was a worshiper in that mosque at the time this attack happened, and he took 7 bullets, and he ran towards the gunman, and he protected, so many others. And I was reading an interview that he gave, and he said that he would do that all over again. He is paralyzed from his chest down, and it's a struggle every day for him. But he is such a grateful man. And, so this is where I feel these type of examples and these type of stories bring a lot of uh, hope, in the sense that these are people who are resilient, who are ready to face so many obstacles and still persevere, and they believe that this is their home. that Canada is their home and they're here and they're not going anywhere. And the motivations of these attackers to instill fear and to displace this community is not going to work. And but at the same time, the resilience needs to be met with efforts, with you know with not just promises, with substantial work on the ground, by not just the communities but the government, provincial, federal, at all levels. We need to amp up our support so that we don't see such incidents repeating themselves ever again. And so, as I mentioned, I think it has to do with the disconnect between what we have on the books and how it's implemented, and to address it in a more cohesive manner.
And it sounds also like there's a disconnect, um, which is creating the barriers between the policies and the practices, and not just carrying out the policies, but just people's recognition of the policies.
Absolutely. At all levels, you'll see that because, at the systemic level, at the, in society, there is, as I mentioned, the rise in anti-Muslim sentiment is is simply just, it's unbelievable. And it doesn't just affect the Muslim community, it also affects the people who are perceived as Muslims. So, the Sikh community has taken a lot of damage because of because they are also perceived as Muslims. So you see, it's a complex matter. It definitely needs more work. But and the policies, they can only be as effective as as their application and their implementation is, right? So a lot of times, these perpetrators get away with doing things, and there are not proper procedures being followed in corporations and even public institutions, and so yeah, I think definitely that disconnect has to be addressed, and more work needs to be done on that, instead of, I think, and more laws are welcome too, but I think, like I said, implementation is key, and that's where the strength of the law is.
So you've studied Muslim women in the labor market and spoken of women who have been exposed to toxicity and violence in the workplace. The intersectionality leading to income inequality and lack of career advancement is no surprise. And you've also examined a link with unpaid care work related to cultural influences that often leads to lower participation. Would you be able to make any suggestions that could create a safer and more equitable work environment for Muslim women in comparison to their non-racialized counterparts?
Yes, that's a very important aspect of their lived experience. And so, as I mentioned, Islamophobia exists at a systemic and societal level globally at this point in history. But in terms of the Canadian society and the labor market, I think at the government level, we have to address, you know, like for instance, we must repeal bills like Bill 21 and Bill 60, which, as the research shows, even though they say that they're addressing religious neutrality and they're in the name of that, but what we see on the ground is that Muslim women are targeted and they are not able to, participate in the labor market. For instance, Quebec is a huge part of Canada, and there are many Muslims who live there. And, by banning particular religious symbols, what we do is then we send a message to the other parts of Canada, and and even though the damage is done in Quebec, the sentiments and the it influences the sentiments in other parts of Canada too. So it's an overall no-win situation. And so barring them from public positions, for instance, there are many stories of teachers who who were removed or who couldn't teach anymore in public education systems. And so, in other public offices too, women who wear hijab, they won't be able to work there. So I think this is at this time in our history, with all the work that has been done, this is taking a step backwards, and it sets dangerous precedents for other communities too. And so basically repealing these bills is, very important at the government level, addressing the damage that they're doing, enforcing the laws that are in the books against hate crimes. The reporting of it is very important because a lot of them go unreported. So work needs to be done on that. We see extremely sad stories, being reported of hijabs being pulled, women being spat at, harassed in offices. So there is definitely more work that needs to be done. We need increased funding, definitely, at the federal and provincial level to combat Islamophobia for that. And in terms of, when we are able to do these types of things, I think it will increase access to the labor market. And that is in itself a step forward for integration. Because as you know, that employment indicators are what we use to measure integration. And it will be extremely important for people who have the foreign credentials and foreign, experience to have this type of access. At the institutional level, I think, their procedures need to be followed. Definitely, there are many procedures in place, but they need to be followed. And so, from recruitment to hiring to promotions, appropriate mechanisms should be in place to identify Islamophobia and to identify this type of discrimination and rightfully address it. At the societal level, I think the role of the media is very important, because online hate is absolutely out of control at this point, and it leads to radicalizing people, young people, who then commit hate crimes against Muslim people. And, so this violence, for instance, the Afzal family terrorist attack, I mean, he was motivated by a lot of hatred towards, Muslims, and the internet is a very difficult place to be for young people. It can be very toxic, and a lot of these ideas were, he was able to, I guess, I'm not sure, I haven't read a lot about it, but I think there was a lot of interest that he had in in sort of decimating the whole entire community, and this really, it's extremely scary, not just again for Muslim community, but for other communities too, um, because he harbored a lot of hate for Jews, he harbored a lot of hate for Black people. So it was, hatred is also a complex emotion because it doesn't have a logic. uh, you know when people hate something or someone, um, many times they don't know why they hate them, because that person is not a human to them, so humanizing uh, these communities and these people is very important. So research very clearly shows that people who Muslims among their friends are less likely, almost unlikely, to harbor any hatred for the Muslim community, you know, compared to people who have never met a Muslim in their life. So, it's hard, obviously, to make no one is going to go out and make a Muslim friend, is not what I'm saying, like actively look for someone. But what I'm saying is that, social interaction, socialization is important.
Mhm.
We are kind of stuck in our isolated enclaves post-pandemic, and we need to get out there. We need to learn more about other communities. And when we do that, we will know that we have a shared humanity. We have the same dreams, we have the same hopes. We have the same love for life and of a better future. And we share these values. These are human values and for justice, for truth. And so a key is, I think, addressing these stereotypes and misinformation that we see about Islam and Muslims. And it is only possible, I think, through education. And education is what will humanize people for each other. And when we are able to do that, I think there's hope. And like I said before, a lot of good work is being done. So you see, we have this special representative, Canada's special representative appointment for Islamophobia. uh, you know, and she's doing a lot of good work. And we have the anti-racism strategy. We have, very clear denouncement of Islamophobia. We have a support from the Canadian government, very clearly set out policies and rules. And but again, going back, the disconnect has to be addressed. We need to see that there is an implementation that occurs of these laws, which are already on the books, which are already in place, and that the police and the other authorities are able to address when things are reported, when crimes are reported. And I think that's really really the key at the societal level. So, like I said, there are various levels at the government, society, all of it has to come together. It has to be a multifaceted, multidimensional approach to addressing this, because there are layers to this problem. And it's only going to get worse if we leave it um, to, to sort of fester the way it is. Um, yeah, I think media plays a huge role. Plays a huge role, and this is where I really admire the work you're doing. I'd like to say that it's very important to address and convey these issues at the appropriate time, and this is the appropriate time.
That's all our questions for today. Thank you so much, Anila, for sharing your extremely important work with us. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think I'm very grateful for this privilege of speaking to you and to your organization. This is something that is this is a privileged space for me. I am I'm grateful that I'm able to share my work, my understanding of these issues. And I am one among many scholars here in Canada who are doing the equity work that is necessary. So I encourage more voices. I encourage more people from other aspects, other areas of society, different in various institutions, because, as I said, it has to be approached from all sides. It needs diverse voices. We need allies. We need people of various communities, all communities. We need to become allies with our First Nations and help them and in their fight for justice. And I think when we help each other is when we are able to achieve these kinds of goals of equality, of security, because as I said, we all have a shared humanity, and it then emerges in these type of times of conflict and oppression, and it comes to the surface at this time. And so I'm just encouraging people to do their part. And I think we have a hopeful future ahead of us. And I believe that in terms of in solidarity, we will be able to achieve these goals.
Thank you so much. This has been a powerful and thought-provoking edition of 100 Sisters on Security, and I hope our viewers and listeners will join us again next time.
Thank you so much.